Main event of the evening.
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we will be discussing Season 4, Episode 24, The Last of the Big Time Malphs.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Last of the Big Time Malphs.
We open at Arnold's, where a kid is helping Al carry in a television set so customers can watch football games.
Why do you let me walk backwards all the time?
Fonzie arrives with a group of girls, and Al asks for his advice on TV set placement. Fonzie initially doesn't care because he has bigger problems. His bike is busted, and he has to rely on these many girls to drive him where he wants to go. Al is confident this will be a big thing, since Ralph started gambling with those football cards. He asks Fonzie what he thinks of the new Ralph, and Fonzie says,
I think I like the old one better.
Fonzie goes into the bathroom, after telling the girls he'll have the answer to who can drive him home later. Ralph strolls in, wearing a plaid sports jacket, with a blonde woman in a low-cut top with massive teased hair on his arm. He calls for everyone to place their bets.
All right, step right up. The big game's about to start. Put your bets down.
Also, he and his girlfriend call each other Dollface and Sugar Lips. Ick. Richie and Potsy arrive in hockey uniforms, looking for Ralph. Their game's starting soon. Ralph introduces them to his very close friend, Sheila, a professional manicurist.
John!
Ralph tells them he has a business to attend to, despite Richie pointing out he's their goalie, and without him, they don't stand a chance against the Shots Hot Shots. Potsy yells at him.
What's with you, Malph?
But Richie, after hearing one of the games has odds of 10-1, places a bet. He bets on White Forest to beat Notre Dame, much to Ralph's amusement. Some guys will do anything to throw away their money. Ralph then collects a bet from a surly-looking guy named Bruiser. Richie and Potsy say Ralph is sick. Sheila agrees with them, but she's just happy Ralph is rich. Fonzie comes out of the restroom. Potsy asks if he wants to be their goalie. Fonzie asks if he wants to be a puck. Richie and Potsy leave for their game, and Fonzie chooses a girl to drive him home.
All right, congratulations, Cicely. Now go out there and warm up the car.
That night at the Cunningham house, Marion and Joni have brought in groceries, and Joni is complaining about getting succotash.
It's your father's favorite, and besides, it's very healthy for you.
Well, it may be healthy, but it makes me sick.
Richie and Ralph enter. Ralph is trying to convince Richie to give him the $1 he lost betting against Notre Dame. Joni makes fun of Ralph's outfit.
So, how are things on the riverboat?
Richie tells his mother their team lost 12-0, in large part because they had a German Shepherd as a goalie. As Richie tries to go upstairs to change out of his uniform, Ralph convinces him to place another bet on an upcoming Green Bay Packers game.
Green Bay Packers are a cinch to win.
Don't hand me that. Everybody knows Paul Hornung's got a bad leg.
He'll play in a wheelchair. What's the difference?
He also admits that his father doesn't know about his little business, and if he did, he'd crack up. Richie thinks Ralph is getting carried away. 10-1 odds. What happens if he loses? Ralph isn't worried. Odds never go against the house. Richie tells Ralph he liked it better when he was a comic. Ralph tries to follow Richie upstairs to get his $1 for the new bet. Howard comes home, with Ralph's father, Dr. Mickey Malph, in tow.
Oh, it was a pleasure to drive you home, Howie. You're such a sweet guy.
Mickey, you don't have to butter me up.
Dr. Malph is trying to convince Howard to support Ralph for Junior Leopard of the Year at the Leopard Lodge. Marion greets Howard and tells Dr. Malph his son is upstairs. Dr. Malph gushes about how great his son is. Richie and Ralph come downstairs. Ralph and his father do a brief comedy routine.
You know, I just came back from Africa and I played cards with the natives.
Zulus?
No, I won.
And then they leave. The Cunninghams sit down for dinner. A week later, the customers at Arnold's are gathered watching football on the television set. Bruiser ripped one of the antenna off, so everything on screen is green. Also, there's no sound.
After the Wake Forest game, Bruiser bit off the knob.
The Green Bay Packers are losing when Ralph and Sheila show up, something Ralph isn't too broken up about. He orders a round of sodas for everyone, then strikes up a conversation with Fonzie, who is trying to find a new piston in a magazine and isn't in the mood to talk to Ralph. As the Packers start playing better, Ralph tries to convince Fonzie to be his partner in exchange for 10, then 50% of his business.
I could use a tough cookie like you to help me collect.
Fonzie thinks Ralph's business is dirty and leaves. Richie reminds Ralph that since everyone bet on Green Bay,
Somebody bet on the Bay.
he could lose a lot of money. Ralph isn't worried, until he sees that a player who he thought had a bad leg is on the field and leading the Packers to victory. Everyone demands the money Ralph owes them, most aggressively among them Bruiser.
I want my $80.
When Ralph doesn't immediately give him his $80, Bruiser drags him into the men's room to beat him up, and Ralph begs him not to hurt him, and promises to get him the money tomorrow. Fonzie comes in, and Ralph does a prompt about face, talking tough to Bruiser on the assumption that Fonzie is here to help Ralph.
Like I said, Bruiser, you'll get your money when you get it.
He's wrong, and Bruiser tries to shove Ralph into one of the stalls. Fonzie steps in then, saying that there's no sport in beating up a guy who's groveling, and surely he can give Ralph 24 hours. Bruiser agrees, but he wants insurance. What does Ralph have that's worth $80? Ralph says he's all cleaned out. All he has left are the fillings in his teeth. Bruiser reaches into his mouth, and Fonzie has to explain Ralph was joking.
I think he was kidding. He fancies himself like a comedian, you know? Bruiser ain't one of your fun-loving audiences, I can tell that right away.
He asks if Bruiser is interested in Sheila, who Bruiser thinks is a brainy chick, and Ralph says that Bruiser can have her.
I don't want her, you can have her.
Bruiser grabs Ralph's hat, tells him he has 24 hours, and leaves. A terrified Ralph asks Fonzie what he's going to do. Fonzie says, pay him back, or learn to live very comfortably in pain. Ralph assumes Fonzie was going to lend him the money the whole time, but the thought never occurred to Fonzie. He assures Ralph that Ralph will find the money, and if not, Ralph's young, he'll recover. Alone in the restroom, Ralph gives himself a pep talk in the mirror.
Come on, Malph. Get a grip on yourself, will you?
He just has to talk to his father, or better yet, get Richie to do it. The next day, Ralph and Richie are in Dr. Malph's optometry office, waiting for Dr. Malph and Howard. When Howard shows up, he says the neighborhood is getting weird. There's some girl downstairs giving a rough-looking guy a manicure. Ralph is terrified, and it doesn't help when Richie jokingly suggests he go get him. While Howard waits for Dr. Malph, Richie and Ralph go into the receptionist's office. Dr. Malph surprises Howard by sneaking up on him with a pair of novelty glasses.
Hi,
You scared me, Mickey.
Howard says he's here to talk about Ralph. Dr. Malph is initially overjoyed, assuming that Ralph won Junior Leopard of the Year. Howard explains Ralph is in trouble because he's been running a gambling operation. Dr. Malph is shocked.
I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here.
And Howard sends Ralph in to tell his father the rest himself. Howard leaves, and Dr. Malph demands to know who got Ralph in trouble. Ralph says he got himself in trouble, but his father doesn't believe him, even as Ralph insists he's not covering up for anyone.
I got myself in trouble.
Ah, Ralphie, you're too good.
Dr. Malph asks what the punchline is. Ralph asks, what's wrong with them? They can't even talk to each other. All they do is tell jokes. Dr. Malph tells Ralph not to yell at his father, and Ralph yells that his father should be yelling at him. It was all his fault. Dr. Malph tells Ralph to sit down. He admits he's never yelled at Ralph. Maybe because he's an only child, maybe because Dr. Malph cares too much about being pals with his son. Ralph hugs his father and says he's sorry for letting him down. Ralph says he knows what he did was wrong, and he'll never do it again, but he owes a lot of money. Dr. Malph says he'll give Ralph the $80, but he's going to work it off his allowance 2 nights a week at the office. Plus, it'll help him when he becomes an optometrist. Ralph admits to his father that he doesn't want to be an optometrist. He wants to be a comedian. Dr. Malph tells his son he's not that funny, and then when Ralph's face falls, says,
Gotcha.
and hugs him. Howard and Richie come back in, and Dr. Malph tells Howard the talk went well, but Ralph told him he doesn't want to be an optometrist. Howard says it's tough to be a parent. Ralph tells Richie he told his dad a lot of things, and it wasn't easy. Richie says it's tough to be a kid.
Thank you, Peter. That was Last of the Big Time Malphs, which first aired back on March 22nd, 1977. That night, Happy Days served as the lead into a brand new Laverne and Shirley, in which the girls visit a haunted house in search of Lenny and Squiggy. CBS countered with a new episode of Who's Who, and on NBC, Pappy, Robert Conrad, was facing off against a Japanese fighter pilot on a brand new episode of Baa Black Sheep. Last of the Big Time Malphs was directed by the one and only Jerry Paris, and it was written by Joe Glauberg, who had just written Fonz How Inc. At the time, Joe was a story editor at Happy Days. More recently, Joe was seen in the 2009 documentary Hollywood on Fire.
How many people here have ever seen the series Happy Days? And most everybody will raise their hands, and I said, how many of you know of somebody who ever got saved watching Happy Days?
As for guest stars this week, obviously we have the return of Jack Dodson as Dr. Mickey Malph.
You know, when they made Ralph, they broke the mold.
I can see why.
This was the second of his 3 appearances on Happy Days. Around the same time, Jack was also guesting on such series as Maude, CPO Sharky, Welcome Back Kotter, and Carter Country. So, Peter, do you have any thoughts on the return of Jack Dodson as Dr. Mickey Malph?
It's always wonderful to see him. He's very good in the role. He's just the right amount of annoying and a little bit charming. I enjoyed seeing him immensely, and I thought he did very well at conveying that Dr. Malph loves his son, he's not great at relating to his son, and prior to this, his relationship with Ralph has largely been defined by the fact that he doesn't really know his son. He just mostly sees him as a mini version of himself.
I shall call him Mini-Me.
And as a result, Ralph doesn't feel comfortable telling him when he's gotten in trouble. So I thought he did a good job at his realization that he needs to be better at providing his son with the discipline that he still needs, or otherwise his son is going to keep being a very incompetent bookie.
From this performance, we see where Ralph developed his obnoxious jokester personality, always relying on these corny jokes rather than trying to relate to people in a genuine or real way. And we see how parents try and mold their kids into being versions of themselves. And I think Jack Dodson conveys that very well. In fact, his performance is one of the things that I liked most about this episode. So kudos to Jack Dodson for playing this part. We also have Christopher Norris as Sheila. At the time of this episode, Christopher had just co-starred with Ron Howard in the 1976 film Eat My Dust, playing the role of Darlene Kurtz.
I want to ride in that car.
They steal a super stocker and tell the world to eat my dust. Darlene is in the fast cars, Hoover is in the Darlene.
This New York actress is mainly known for her work in soap operas like Another World, Guiding Light, and Santa Barbara, but she was also a series regular on Trapper John M.D., playing nurse Gloria Ripples Bancusi for 6 years.
I have had it up to here with your sophomore interns and their hormone problems. They wouldn't know.
Ripples. Come on, give me a hand.
And don't call me Ripples.
And she was in the star-studded movie Airport 1975 with Charlton Heston and Karen Black. So did you have any thoughts or feelings on Christopher Norris as Sheila?
This episode has weird gender politics. It's there in the running gag of Fonzie having to deal with a gaggle of girls who all want to drive him places and just kind of following him around even when he doesn't pick one of them. And it's there in how Ralph barters away Sheila to Bruiser in exchange for Bruiser not beating him up. I will say that I did like that Sheila basically admitted that she thinks Ralph is obnoxious and she's only with him because he has money. Because, yeah, Ralph is kind of obnoxious, and chances are most people would only put up with him if they were getting something material out of it. And I did like at least that Bruiser seemed to genuinely think that Sheila was smart and worth talking to. So, there's that. But her treatment of this episode is not great.
No, it is not. I was wondering if you were going to pick up on the rather disturbing thread of Sheila basically being used as a bargaining chip between Ralph and Bruiser. I think maybe the upshot of that is that Bruiser and Sheila seem to develop a nice relationship after that, so I guess that's sort of...
I like to think they stay together after this episode.
I do too. I think Christopher Norris brings a level of fun to this role as Sheila. One lingering question about this, do you think that is Christopher Norris's real hair at the beginning of the episode, or is she wearing some sort of weird wig?
I feel like it could go either way.
If it's her real hair, I am very impressed. And last but not least, we also have Paul Link as Bruiser, another New Yorker. Paul is definitely best known as Officer Arthur Grossman on Chips.
I'm here, Officer Grossman / Grossy.
Okay. But he, too, appeared in one of Ron Howard's car chase movies from the 1970s, in this case, Grand Theft Auto, Ron's directing debut. He and Ron worked together again on the movie Parenthood in 1989. Paul's other films include Motel Hell, The Baby Maker, Shrunken Heads, and Big Bad Mama. Peter, what did you think of Paul Link as Bruiser?
I like that he basically plays Bruiser as this complete brute. Like, his response to losing a bet on a football game is to cause destruction to the television set, and nobody tries to stop him because they figure it's more trouble than just letting him do what he wants. And I also think it's interesting that he's the only one that Ralph is genuinely afraid of. Everyone else just kind of apparently just lets it go when Ralph can't pay them back for the bet they made and won. No, Bruiser takes this sort of thing seriously. He knows that Ralph owes him money, and he's going to get it. Or he's going to beat Ralph up. And really, that's a win-win.
Paul Link as Bruiser is almost like a missing link in this episode. He plays him almost like an animal, and he's very convincing in that. And you definitely feel like Bruiser would probably beat the crap out of Ralph Malph, which Ralph definitely deserves in this episode. As for songs this week, we have I'm Walkin' by Fats Domino, The Great Pretender by The Platters, and Splish Splash by Bobby Darin, which is used when Ralph is presumably getting his head dunked in the toilet. Did you think that was what was happening in the bathroom stall?
More or less. It's a clever little thing.
As for cultural and historical references, this episode's title is a reference to the expression last of the big spenders, an American idiom that is usually meant ironically to refer to someone who spends very little money. The phrase dates back to the 1920s, but it became bitterly sarcastic during the Great Depression that followed, and it's the sarcastic meaning that stuck.
What about the last of big time spenders?
Ralph scoffs when Richie picks Wake Forest to beat Notre Dame. As far as I can tell, these teams did not actually play each other in the 1950s or 60s at all. They're in different conferences, and they don't even play each other that often even now. Notre Dame is historically a much, much better team than Wake Forest. These two teams have played each other a handful of times in the last 10 years, with Notre Dame always victorious. I am not a sports person at all, so I'm at a real disadvantage in an episode like this because I really don't have any knowledge of what they're talking about.
Yeah, every time they started talking about the specifics, I just kind of zoned out and replaced it with football, football, football.
I'm not exactly sure what Fonzie means by my heart is like Mount Rushmore.
Oh, you know, I tell you something, my heart is like Mount Rushmore.
It's big, it has room for multiple people. I don't know.
Oh, that's a good idea that there's room for multiple people there. Perhaps he is referring to the epic size of the famed Keystone, South Dakota monument, which measures 2,296 feet wide and 984 feet high.
Either that, or he means that his heart was built on ground that is sacred to the Lakota Sioux as a fuck you to them by a white supremacist government that is trying to actively genocide them.
The audience just is kind of silent. They don't react at all. So maybe they're processing all of that history. For those who may not know, which I didn't, succotash is simply a combination of corn and lima beans. But you can add other kinds of beans for variety, plus tomatoes, potatoes, pork, peppers, etc. Whatever you want, really. There are no rules to succotash.
Suffering succotash.
Although I will have to admit, frozen succotash did not look very appetizing in this episode. Have you ever had succotash?
Yes, it was pretty good.
Was it frozen succotash?
It was not.
Paul Hornung is big in this episode. Paul Hornung, also known as the Golden Boy, is a Hall of Fame running back from Kentucky who played for the Green Bay Packers from 1957 to 1966.
Please, if you'll all just go back to your drinking.
He spent his successful college career at Notre Dame, where he won the Heisman Trophy.
He won the Heisman Trophy as a quarterback at the University of Notre Dame, and he was a first-round draft choice of the Green Bay Packers in 1957. When he arrived in Green Bay, the only feasible legend in the region was the amount of booze consumed in the town's 197 bars. But after he left, 9 years later, Green Bay had become known as Titletown, USA. He led the Packers to 3 world championships. Twice, he was the league's most valuable player, and for 3 consecutive years, he led the NFL in scoring. And he was probably the best blocking back the game has ever known. Because of his narrow, sloping shoulders, his teammates nicknamed him Goat Shoulders, or Goat for short. But perhaps you remember him better as the Golden Boy. Paul Hornung is the subject of our NFL scrapbook.
I assume this story on Happy Days is occurring in either 1958 or 1959. The 58 Packers had a miserable 1-10-1 record, the worst in team history. In 1959, under new coach Vince Lombardi, they improved considerably to 7-5, which was the team's first winning season in a dozen years. Hornung played for both squads. In a very badly dubbed line, Ralph says, "Do you think Rockefeller got rich trusting people?"
Hey, Rich, you think Rockefeller got rich trusting people?
There are many prominent Rockefellers, but Ralph is probably referring to John D. Rockefeller, who founded the Standard Oil Company in 1870 and became the richest man in America and possibly the richest in modern history. Howard mentions Abbott and Costello. Comedians Bud Abbott and Lou Costello formed a partnership in burlesque in the mid-30s. By 1938, they found success in radio.
I shouldn't be kidding, Abbott. I mean, after all, I got a threatening letter today. Somebody wants to kill me. How many people listen to you every week, Costello? Well, let me see. You only get about 12 million. That's amazing. You mean that I got so many listeners? Now that you only got one threatening letter.
And by the 1940s, they were appearing in movies. They were the most popular comedy team of the 1940s, with one hit movie after another. In the 1950s, their movie career cooled off a little bit, so the team moved to television before breaking up permanently. Lou died in 1959 at the age of 52. At Arnold's, Fonzie is reading the Motorcycle Repair Manual, published by Peterson in 1973 and written by Bob Greene and the editors of Motorcyclist magazine. The Packers player who scores that winning touchdown is wearing the number 32 on his jersey, so that cannot be Paul Hornung, who wore number 5. I can find no evidence, by the way, that Fred Astaire ever said, "If you want to dance, you got to pay the fiddler." Astaire is the legendary dancer, singer, and actor from Nebraska, whose film and TV career spans 76 years. He's best known for musicals like Top Hat.
All I know is that it's heaven. I'm in heaven. And I seem to find the happiness I see when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek.
and Swing Time. Fun fact, Fred Astaire was the very first performer added to the Internet Movie Database, so his number there is 000001. And Ralph owes about $700 in today's money. Does he still own that car? You know, the car that we see in the opening credits?
Oh, wow. Yeah, Ralph, you could have just given that to Bruiser instead of bartering away Sheila.
Other observations this week. Jerry Paris's son, Tony, has another nice cameo at the beginning of the episode, helping Al move that TV set into Arnold's. Al even calls him by his real name.
Okay, put it on the table here, Tony.
And in a few years, Tony Paris is going to be a producer on Laverne and Shirley. Happy Days was at the apex of its popularity in 1977, so Fonzie's entrance where he's swarmed by screaming girls...
Girls, time out here. Will you just calm down?
is pretty indicative of reality at the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought that scene was kind of about. This is at the height of Happy Days mania. Now, we got to get into the continuity of this. I have no idea when this episode is supposed to be taking place. It's both football and hockey season, so I have to assume it's like October.
And everyone is wearing coats, so I guess it would be kind of in the colder season, so October would make sense, maybe? I don't know.
Well, the weather is cool and not cold, and the trees are still green and leafy, so I doubt it's November in Wisconsin. I thought these episodes were supposed to be taking place in the summer between high school and college.
I mean, on the other hand, we find out that apparently Joni's Weird Boyfriend takes place when Richie and company are still 17, so that would place it before A Place of His Own, where Richie explicitly says he's 18.
Well, you know, Richie also in this episode is wearing his Jefferson jacket, so maybe he is still in high school, and in Joni's Weird Boyfriend, he and Ralph and Potsy are all referred to as high school students. So I'm guessing that this episode takes place in the autumn of 1958, several months before graduation, so I think this is like a flashback episode. But then, if it's going back to 1958, the Packers only won one game that year. They were like the worst team in the NFL. So it's doubtful that everybody would be betting their money on the Packers. So
hey, you got to rep for your home state.
Everybody in Milwaukee bets Green Bay.
I guess maybe this was the one game that they won. Then again, the fact that Richie's team is playing Schatz Brewery rather than another school suggests that he and Potsy are playing for Arnold's. So I guess this is another one of Arnold's many athletic teams. I know they have a basketball team, a baseball team, and a cheerleading squad.
Yeah, what bothered me about that was that it made me wonder if Laverne and Shirley were maybe on the Schatz hockey team, and we could have had a crossover episode about that, about them playing on opposite sides of this corporate hockey game.
Oh my gosh, all the fun that they could have had on the ice. That would have been a hilarious episode. Joni's beret is back this week. I think there is a concerted effort to make that her signature look.
It's a good look.
And I don't see why breaking the antenna would make the screen turn green, or why removing the volume knob would disable the sound altogether.
Maybe Bruiser did more damage than anyone let on.
Yeah, I think he must have done some damage to the picture tube. To point out the obvious, as we've been talking about, doesn't Ralph owe a lot more than $80?
Yeah, he does. I guess everyone else just kind of gave up because Ralph's kind of stupid, and maybe they figure he's not worth it. And it's their own fault for trusting him in the first place.
The way I figure it, he says he's offering 10-to-1 odds. Bruiser, I'm guessing, bet $8 with him, so he gets $80 back. And then everybody else bet $1, like Richie. But there's got to be like 10 or 15 people gathered around that television set. So, I don't know, I think he owes a lot more than that. And I will defer to you on this next one. We are on the third dad for Ralph, aren't we?
Yeah. Ralph's had a lot of dads.
My son calls another man daddy.
And I don't think Ralph would make a good optometrist or a good comedian for that matter, but I think he would do less harm as a comedian. Yeah. So I guess he should be a comedian. I don't really know what job Ralph would be suited for. What does he eventually wind up doing other than going into the army?
Well, afterwards, he ends up giving up on his dreams of becoming a comedian and going to optometry school at the behest of his father in exchange for a car.
I guess ultimately this episode didn't matter. Then I guess this episode, like the big break, it is a little sad. Peter, I will ask, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
Well, of course, the obvious answer is the amazing Bookie outfit that Ralph wears. So he's got a plaid sports jacket, white pants, a red and black shirt, and a very loud tie. During the scene where the Green Bay Packers win, he also tosses over a white suit jacket and a fedora. You can't deny that he was putting effort into it.
Yeah, he was obviously trying to play the part of a big-time bookie kudos to the wardrobe department for creating some really great flashy outfits for him. And Fonzie was saying at the beginning of the episode that he preferred the old Ralph Malph, but I kind of like this new huckster Ralph dressed in these great outfits, and it's kind of a shame we don't get to see him dressed like that every week.
I mean, Ralph's going to be obnoxious either way. At least this way he also gets to be a fashion icon.
Yeah, so that was one advantage of this story. So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question, was this episode any good?
It was. I think it works best as kind of a little character study of Ralph, and it gives a pretty good indication of why he is the way he is.
Why are you the way that you are?
And it's because of his upbringing, because his father has basically been more interested in turning Ralph into a mini version of himself without really getting to know his son, and he doesn't really know what Ralph is capable of, and he doesn't really take Ralph seriously, even when he really should be taking him seriously, or his son's going to get into really bad trouble.
I would agree. This was an episode that I liked better the second time I saw it. The first time, I thought that the third act twist there, the confrontation between Ralph and his father, came out of nowhere. I thought this was just like a goofy story about Ralph kind of getting in over his head as a bookie, and then all of a sudden we're delving into Ralph's relationship with his father. I was like, wow, this is really unearned. This is suddenly turning into a serious episode. It was like the goofiest episode, and suddenly we're serious. But I can now see on return viewings how they do set up the ending, because you have Ralph's dad thinking that his son is perfect and thinking that his son should be the junior leopard of the year, which I assume he's not.
It's one of the episodes that's kind of darker than it was probably intended to be, which I like.
Well, yeah, the darkest moment, and in fact, my favorite moment of the episode is when Donnie Most says,
"What's the matter with this, Dad? We can't even talk to each other. All we do is tell jokes."
He's realized this relationship that he has with his dad, it's not real. It's all based on joking. You have to sympathize with Ralph in that this wacky knock-knock joke world that he lives in day to day is kind of a nightmare. He's in this wacky world of novelty glasses and jokes about Zulus and things like that. And you think, oh, that would be fun for like 5 minutes, but...
the weird and forced happiness of the Happy Days universe.
And his is the worst version of it, because he has to basically live in a novelty shop his whole life. He basically lives in Spencer Gifts, you know? It's like... So the first time I watched this episode, I wasn't really prepared for that twist. So it seemed like it came out of nowhere. But when I watched the episode back again, I realized that they had actually set it up. And hopefully Ralph was not given a Junior Leopard of the Year. I think Junior Leopard of the Year should probably be Richie.
He's a good kid.
Yeah, who is a genuinely good kid. Richie and Fonz both try to talk Ralph out of this bookie career of his. And by the way, bookmaking in the state of Wisconsin is completely illegal. That is never brought up.
Was it illegal in the 1950s?
The only place where it was legal was Nevada.
There are so many consequences that Ralph should be facing for this that he does not.
Yeah, he should actually consider himself very lucky that the consequences actually aren't worse. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Volfranx. That's VULFRANX.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysareours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysareourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, it's one of those episodes where the title kind of tells you everything, so I don't really know what to add, except it's the season finale with Fonzie's baptism.
Wow, season finale already. Boy, this season just zoomed right by, didn't it?
Well, how time flies when you're having fun.
So, see you later, alligator?
In a while, crocodile.